Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled as she stared into the bathroom mirror at 3 in the morning. The fluorescent light revealed what she could no longer deny, a mass the size of a walnut protruding from the bridge of her nose. Angry red-purple, its peak ulcerated and weeping. Blood dripped steadily into the white porcelain sink. 8 weeks ago, it had been nothing, a tiny bump. Just allergies, she'd told herself. I'm a nurse, I'd know if something was wrong. But nurses made the worst patients. Her finger touched the swelling, hot, rigid, throbbing with each heartbeat. Pain shot through her skull. Michael's worried voice came through the door. "Sarah!" Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Dr. Harrison, her dermatologist, glowed in red letters. "Urgent! Come in immediately!" Sarah's reflection stared back, a 15-year veteran nurse, now terrified of her own face. Leave all you like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 8 weeks earlier, Sarah Mitchell's life had been beautifully ordinary. The two-story house in Seattle's Ballard neighborhood smelled of coffee and toast each morning, filled with the comfortable chaos of a family starting their day. Michael stood at the stove, flipping pancakes while humming along to the radio. Sarah rushed through the kitchen, grabbing her travel mug and kissing his cheek. Their daughter Emma thundered down the stairs, backpack bulging with textbooks for her upcoming SAT exam. "Mom, can you help me with chemistry tonight?" Emma asked, pouring orange juice. "I'll be home by 6. Sarah promised, squeezing her daughter's shoulder. "We'll conquer molecular bonds together." Michael handed her a packed lunch. "Drive safe. Love you." These small rituals, the morning kiss, the shared breakfast, the promises of evening study sessions, were the threads that wove their lives together. Sarah treasured them, even as she rushed out the door into Seattle's perpetual drizzle. Providence. Seattle Medical Center rose against the gray sky, a fortress of glass and steel where Sarah had spent 15 years as an oncology nurse. The 4th-floor cancer ward was her second home. She knew every hallway, every supply closet, every flickering fluorescent light that maintenance kept promising to fix. "Morning." "Sarah?" Jennifer Davis called from the nurse's station, her closest colleague and confidant. Jennifer had worked alongside her for a decade. The morning meeting gathered the nursing staff around a conference table cluttered with coffee cups and patient charts. They discussed overnight developments, medication changes, and the emotional states of patients fighting their final battles. Sarah's assignment that day included Margaret Thompson, a 68-year-old woman with stage 4 lung cancer. But Margaret was more than a patient. She'd become a friend, a mentor even. 40 years ago, Margaret had been a nurse herself, working these same halls before retiring. Now she occupied room 427, her body withering, but her spirit somehow luminous. "How's my favorite nurse?" Margaret asked when Sarah entered with morning medications. "I should be asking you that question," Sarah replied, adjusting the IV drip. They talked about everything: Margaret's grandchildren, Sarah's worries about Emma's college applications, the changing landscape of nursing over 4 decades. Margaret spoke without fear about dying, which paradoxically made Sarah feel more alive. These conversations taught Sarah that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it with grace. Late that afternoon, washing her face in the staff bathroom, Sarah noticed a small bump on the bridge of her nose. She touched it pea-sized, slightly firm. not painful, probably bumped into something during a patient transfer. She thought, or maybe that new face cream. She applied some anti-inflammatory ointment from her locker and dismissed it. Just a minor or irritation. Nothing important. If only she'd known how wrong she was. 2 weeks passed, and the bump refused to disappear. Sarah checked it every morning, pressing gently, watching for changes. It grew incrementally, from pea to grape, the redness deepening to an angry burgundy. The skin stretched tight and shiny across its surface. She applied stronger creams, changed her skincare routine, even stopped using makeup. Nothing helped. The growth persisted with stubborn determination, a foreign invader claiming territory on her face. Michael noticed during breakfast one morning. His fork paused halfway to his mouth, eyes fixed on her nose. "Sarah, that looks worse. How long has it been there?" "A couple weeks. It's just inflammation," she said, turning away to rinse her coffee cup. The water ran longer than necessary. "Maybe you should see someone." "I will. After this week, we're short-staffed." It was easier to focus on her patients than herself. Easier to pour energy into Margaret's chemotherapy schedule than confront the strange rebellion occurring on her own face. By week 4, the lump had reached the size of a large marble. Sarah began wearing her hair forward, angling her face away from direct light. She caught Jennifer staring during their shift change. "Sarah, seriously, what is that?" Jennifer's concern cut through professional politeness. "I don't know yet. I'm monitoring it." "You're a nurse, not a dermatologist. You need to get that checked." That same afternoon, Emma came home from school and stopped dead in the kitchen doorway. Her face went pale. "Mom, oh my God. What happened to your nose?" Sarah instinctively touched the swelling. It felt hot beneath her fingertips, radiating warmth like a coal burning beneath her skin. For the first time, genuine fear flickered in her chest. She stood before the bathroom mirror after Emma went upstairs. Really looked. The growth now dominated the bridge of her nose, impossible to ignore, impossible to hide. The color had darkened to deep crimson, and the surface had begun to take on a disturbing sheen. Michael appeared in the doorway behind her. Their eyes met in the mirror's reflection. "Please," he said softly. "Call someone tomorrow." Sarah nodded, unable to speak around the tightness in her throat. That night, she researched online skin infections, benign tumors, cysts. Each possibility seemed both plausible and insufficient. The images she found didn't quite match what she saw in her mirror. Week 6 arrived with escalating urgency. A young resident at the hospital pulled her aside. "Nurse Mitchell, I don't mean to overstep, but that lesion needs evaluation. Have you seen dermatology?" "I'm handling it," Sarah said, more sharply than intended. But she wasn't handling it. She was drowning in denial while the evidence grew larger on her face. Margaret noticed, too, during their afternoon conversation. The elderly woman studied Sarah with eyes that had seen too much suffering to be fooled by evasions. "Sarah, dear, don't wait," Margaret said, gripping her hand with surprising strength. "I ignored symptoms for 6 months. Look where that got me." That night, Sarah barely slept. The throbbing in her nose intensified, a persistent drumbeat matching her anxious heart. At 3 in the morning, she woke to wetness on her face. Stumbling to the bathroom, she discovered blood the growth had ulcerated, weeping fluid that stained her pillowcase. Michael found her there, trembling, finally crying. "I'll call first thing in the morning," she whispered. He held her while Seattle rain drummed against the windows, washing away the last of her denials. Sarah's hands shook as she dialed Seattle dermatology specialists at 8 o'clock sharp. She'd rehearsed what to say, but her voice cracked anyway. "I need an appointment. I have a growth on my nose that's been there for several weeks. It's bleeding now." The receptionist's tone shifted immediately from routine to urgent. "Can you describe the size and appearance?" "About the size of a large grape, dark red, ulcerated at the top. It's been growing steadily for 6 weeks." A pause. Keyboard clicks. "We can see you today at 2 o'clock. Dr. Harrison will examine you personally." Sarah's stomach dropped. Same-day appointments in dermatology were reserved for serious concerns, possible melanomas, aggressive infections, things that couldn't wait. She called the hospital, requesting her first sick day in 2 years. Jennifer answered, immediately worried. "Are you okay? What's wrong?" "I'm finally getting this thing checked out." "Thank God! Do you want me to come with you?" "Michael's taken me, but thank you." After hanging up, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at her cold coffee. Michael came downstairs, already dressed, car keys in hand. "Ready?" he asked gently. She wasn't. She'd spent 15 years caring for people facing devastating diagnoses. She'd held hands through chemotherapy, whispered encouragement during painful procedures, watched bodies fail despite everyone's best efforts. She knew too much about what could go wrong with the human body. That knowledge terrified her now. The drive across Seattle felt surreal. Rain misted the windshield. People walked dogs, carried groceries, lived ordinary lives, while Sarah's world tilted toward something unknown and possibly terrible. She watched them with envy, strangers unburdened by the weight of her growing dread. Michael reached across the console, lacing his fingers through hers. "Whatever this is, we'll handle it together." She nodded, unable to speak past the fear lodged in her throat. The waiting room at Seattle dermatology specialist smelled of antiseptic and lavender air freshener, attempting to mask clinical sterility. Sarah chose a seat in the corner, angling her face away from other patients. A woman with a bandaged arm glanced at Sarah's nose, then quickly looked away. Self-consciousness burned through her. She'd become the person others stared at, the one with the visible affliction that made people uncomfortable. Michael sat beside her, pretending to read a magazine, but really just turning pages at random intervals. 15 minutes felt like 15 hours. Sarah Mitchell, a nurse, stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand, expression professionally neutral. Sarah rose on unsteady legs. The examination room was smaller than she expected. White walls, gleaming equipment, a poster showing various skin conditions that made her stomach churn. Michael squeezed her hand before she sat on the crinkly paper covering the exam table. Dr. Robert Harrison entered moments later, early 50s, graying hair, kind eyes that nevertheless assessed her face with clinical precision. He washed his hands thoroughly while introducing himself. "Tell me when you first noticed this growth," he said, rolling his stool closer. Sarah recounted the timeline, the initial small bump, her dismissal of it, the steady growth, the ulceration. As she spoke, Dr. Harrison donned magnifying loupes and leaned in, examining the mass from multiple angles. He measured it with calipers, photographed it from various perspectives, palpated the surrounding tissue. His expression gave nothing away. But Sarah recognized the subtle tightening around his eyes. She'd seen that look before when doctors discovered something concerning. "I need to perform a biopsy today," Dr. Harrison said. "The tissue will go to pathology for analysis. We should have preliminary results in 3 to 4 days." "What are you thinking it might be?" Sarah asked, her nurse's training demanding information. Dr. Harrison met her eyes directly. "I won't speculate until we have definitive answers. But given the location, growth rate, and presentation, we need to rule out several possibilities." He didn't say the words cancer, aggressive infection, rare conditions, but they hung in the air anyway. The biopsy itself was quick. Local anesthetic, a needle punch through the swollen tissue, the sample deposited into a sterile container. Sarah closed her eyes, gripping Michael's hand, while her professional knowledge warred with her patient's fear. Wait. 3 days of waiting stretched into an eternity of anxiety that permeated every moment. Sarah tried to maintain normalcy, but the swelling on her nose continued to worsen, now the size of a walnut, angry and weeping despite constant bandaging. She attempted to work, but concentration proved impossible. During medication rounds, she caught herself staring at nothing, her mind spinning through worst-case scenarios. Jennifer covered for her when she needed to change the dressing in the bathroom, emerging with fresh gauze that quickly became saturated with blood and serous fluid. "You should be home," Jennifer said gently during their lunch break. "I need the distraction," Sarah replied, though she barely touched her sandwich. The swelling demanded bandage changes every 4 hours now. The pain had intensified from dull throbbing to sharp, persistent aching that radiated across her face. Over-the-counter pain medication barely touched it. At home, Emma moved through the house with uncharacteristic quietness, as if noise might somehow make things worse. She'd been crying. Sarah saw the redness around her daughter's eyes, the tissue box on her nightstand. Michael tried to maintain cheerful conversation over dinner, but his forced optimism felt worse than silence. Sarah lay awake each night, listening to Michael's breathing beside her, counting hours until morning. Her mind replayed every patient she'd cared for with rare conditions, every unexpected diagnosis, every time she'd watched families receive devastating news. She knew too much about medicine's capacity for cruelty. On the 4th morning, her phone rang during breakfast. The caller ID showed Seattle dermatology specialists. Sarah's hand trembled so violently she nearly dropped the phone. "Sarah, this is Dr. Harrison." His voice carried an unfamiliar weight. "I need you to come to the office this afternoon, I've scheduled a consultation at 4 o'clock. So can't you tell me over the phone?" Her voice sounded distant, not quite her own. "I'd prefer to discuss the findings in person. I've also asked to Patricia Walsh, an infectious disease specialist, to join us." An infectious disease specialist. The words landed like stones in her stomach. "Dr. Harrison, please, I'm a nurse. I can handle whatever you need to tell me." A long pause. "Sarah, the pathology results show something we rarely encounter. I need multiple specialists to review this with you. 4 o'clock. Please bring your husband." The line went dead. Sarah sat frozen, phone still pressed to her ear. Michael stood from his chair, coffee forgotten. "What did he say?" "He wants us there at 4. "With an infectious disease doctor." Her voice cracked. "Michael, That means it's not cancer. It's something else, something worse. The hours between the call and the appointment crawled by with excruciating slowness. Sarah paced the house, unable to sit, unable to think beyond the churning fear. She called the hospital again, taking another day off. Jennifer didn't ask questions, just said she'd cover everything. Emma came home from school early, having told her teachers about a family emergency. She wrapped her arms around Sarah without speaking, and they stood that way in the kitchen while afternoon light slanted through the windows. "Mom, I'm scared," Emma whispered. "Me too, sweetheart, me too." At 3:30, they drove to the medical complex in heavy silence. Seattle traffic moved with its typical congestion, but Sarah barely noticed. The swelling on her nose throbbed with each heartbeat, a constant reminder of the alien thing growing on her face. The waiting room was empty this time. They sat for less than 5 minutes before being ushered into a conference room instead of an examination room. That detail sent fresh anxiety through Sarah's chest. Conference rooms meant serious discussions, multiple doctors, complex situations. Dr. Harrison entered first, followed by a woman in her mid-40s with sharp and intelligent eyes and prematurely silver hair. "Sarah, Michael, this is Dr. Patricia Walsh. She specializes in infectious diseases and has reviewed your biopsy results." Dr. Harrison's face was grave. "What we're dealing with is extremely unusual and concerning." Dr. Walsh opened a folder containing microscope images and laboratory reports. "Sarah, you have a bacterial infection caused by Staphylococcus epidermidis, normally a harmless bacteria that lives on everyone's skin. But this particular strain has developed extensive antibiotic resistance." Sarah's medical training kicked in despite her fear. "How extensive?" "It's resistant to methicillin, penicillin, cephalosporins, and shows reduced susceptibility to vancomycin. We've never documented this level of resistance in this bacterial species outside of a hospital environment." The implications crashed over Sarah like cold water. A multi-drug-resistant infection on her face, mere centimeters from her brain. "The location is particularly dangerous." Dr. Harrison continued. "The nose has direct vascular connections to the brain. If this infection spreads, meningitis, sepsis, brain abscess." Sarah finished the sentence. Her voice was hollow. Dr. Walsh nodded gravely. "Without aggressive intervention, yes, we need to act immediately." Dr. Walsh pulled additional images from her folder, computerized scans showing the extent of the infection. The mass had sent tendrils deep into the nasal tissue, approaching the thin bone separating Sarah's sinus cavity from her brain. "We have a narrow window," Dr. Walsh said. "The infection is progressing despite your immune system's efforts. We need surgical debridement followed by an aggressive antibiotic regimen." A third doctor entered the room, Dr. Helen Martinez, a reconstructive surgeon Sarah recognized from hospital conferences. Her presence made everything more real, more terrifying. "I'll be frank with you, Sarah," Dr. Martinez said, sitting across from her. "To completely remove the infected tissue, we'll need to excise approximately 30 to 40% of your nasal cartilage. The cosmetic impact will be significant. Your nose will be permanently altered." The words hung in the air. Sarah touched her face instinctively, feeling the hot, swollen mass that had once been normal tissue. "How significant?" Michael asked, his voice tight. Dr. Martinez didn't look away. "Substantial asymmetry, visible scarring, multiple reconstructive surgeries will be needed over the next year to restore function and appearance. But it will never look exactly as it did before." Sarah felt tears sliding down her face. 15 years of nursing, of maintaining professional composure, and she sat crying in a conference room while doctors discussed dismantling her face. "What about the antibiotics?" she managed to ask. "Linezolid, daptomycin, and tigecycline in combination." DeWalsh explained, "It's an experimental protocol. We've only used it in a handful of cases. The side effects include potential kidney damage, bone marrow suppression, and liver toxicity. You'll need to be monitored intensely for 6 to 8 weeks. And if I don't do this?" Sarah already knew the answer but needed to hear it spoken. "The infection will reach your brain within 2 to 3 weeks." DeWalsh said without inflection. "Once that happens, survival rates drop dramatically. We're talking about meningitis, brain abscess, septic shock. Even with treatment at that stage, mortality is over 60%. Michael made a sound, not quite a sob, but close. Emma, who'd been sitting silently, buried her face in her hands. Dr. Harrison leaned forward. "Sarah, I know this is overwhelming. You have 24 hours to decide, but I strongly urge you not to wait. Every day increases the risk." Sarah looked at Michael, then at Emma. Her daughter's shoulders shook with silent crying. Her husband's face had gone gray, aged years in minutes. She thought of Margaret Thompson lying in her hospital bed, fighting a cancer that would ultimately win. Margaret, who'd told her not to ignore symptoms, not to wait, not to let fear paralyze her into inaction. She thought of all the patients she'd cared for who'd discovered their conditions too late, the ones who'd ignored warning signs, postponed appointments, convinced themselves that problems would resolve on their own. She'd been one of them, a medical professional who'd watched a growth consume her face for 8 weeks while making excuses. No more waiting, no more denial. "I don't need 24 hours, Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Schedule the surgery. When's the earliest you can do it?" Dr. Harrison exchanged glances with Dr. Martinez and DeWalsh. "Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. You'll need to be admitted tonight for preoperative preparation and IV antibiotics." "Then let's do it tomorrow." Michael gripped her hand so tightly it hurt, but she didn't pull away. Emma looked up, tears streaming, and Sarah reached for her daughter's other hand. "Mom, are you sure?" Emma whispered. Sarah nodded. "The alternative is worse. Sweetheart, this is the only choice." DeWalsh began outlining the procedure in clinical detail, the surgical approach, the antibiotic infusion protocols, the post-operative care. Sarah listened with the split awareness of being both medical professional and terrified patient. Part of her understood and cataloged the information. Another part screamed silently at the nightmare unfolding. They left the office with a stack of consent forms, preoperative instructions, and prescriptions for pre-surgical medications. The Seattle rain had intensified, matching the darkness settling over Sarah's world. In the car, Michael didn't start the engine immediately. He sat gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white. "I'm so scared," he said, his voice breaking. "Me too." Sarah touched his face, turning him toward her. "But We don't have a choice. This is survival. Now, they drove home through rush-hour traffic. Emma sat in the back seat, texting someone, probably her best friend. Maybe her older brother Thomas, who lived in Portland. Sarah caught fragments, surgery tomorrow, and really bad, and I don't know. At home, Sarah packed a hospital bag with practiced efficiency toiletries, comfortable clothes, phone charger, a book she knew she wouldn't read. Her hands moved automatically while her mind spun through what tomorrow would bring. Jennifer called as Sarah was zipping the bag. "I heard you're having surgery. What can I do?" "Just pray," Sarah said, "or whatever the atheist equivalent is. Send good thoughts into the universe." "I'll be there tomorrow, but what time?" 7 a.m.? But you don't need to." "I'll be there," Jennifer said firmly. "You've been there for everyone else. Let us be there for you." After hanging up, Sarah walked to Emma's room. Her daughter lay curled on the bed, staring at her phone without really seeing it. "Can I come in?" Emma nodded, making space. Sarah lay beside her daughter, and they stayed that way as the room darkened, not speaking, just breathing together. "I love you so much," Sarah finally whispered. "I love you too, Mom. You're going to be okay. You have to be okay." Sarah held her daughter and lied with all the conviction she could muster. "I will be. I promise." Sarah didn't sleep that night. She lay beside Michael in their bed, listening to rain drum against the windows, watching shadows move across the ceiling. Every few minutes she touched her face, feeling the alien mass that would be carved away in the morning. At midnight, she gave up pretending and went downstairs. In the kitchen, she sat at the table where they'd shared countless meals, countless ordinary moments she'd never fully appreciated. She wrote letters by lamplight, one for Emma, one for Michael, one for her brother Thomas, words for if things went wrong, final thoughts she couldn't bear to leave unspoken. Michael found her at 2 in the morning, tears dripping onto the paper. He didn't say anything, just pulled her close and held her while she finally broke down completely. "I'm so scared," she sobbed against his chest. "What if I don't wake up? What if something goes wrong? Then you'll have fought," he whispered into her hair. "That's all anyone can do." They woke Emma at 4 to drive to Providence Seattle Medical Center. The city was still dark, streets empty except for early shift workers and delivery trucks. Sarah watched familiar landmarks pass the coffee shop where they bought lattes on Sundays, the park where Emma had learned to ride a bike, ordinary places that suddenly felt precious. The hospital lobby was eerily quiet at 5 in the morning. A security guard nodded recognition at Sarah. She'd walked these halls thousands of times as a nurse. Now she was being processed as a patient, handed a plastic bracelet with her name and medical record number. Jennifer was waiting outside the pre-surgical area, along with Rebecca Stone, one of the younger nurses Sarah had mentored. Both hugged her wordlessly. "We switched shifts to be here," Jennifer said. "Half the oncology floor wanted to come, but we told them you'd kill us for abandoning patients." Sarah laughed, but it came out as a sob. The preoperative nurse led her to a curtained bay. Sarah changed into a hospital gown, the thin, inadequate garment she'd helped countless patients into. The IV needle slid into her arm with practiced efficiency. Antibiotics began flowing through the line, the first assault on the bacteria colonizing her face. Dr. Walsh appeared at 6:30, checking the antibiotic infusion, reviewing Sarah's vital signs. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Sarah admitted. "That's appropriate, but you're in excellent hands. Dr. Martinez is one of the best reconstructive surgeons in the Pacific Northwest." A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Margaret Thompson was being wheeled toward Sarah's bay in a wheelchair, oxygen cannula in place, a nurse steadying the IV pole attached to her chair. "Margaret, what are you doing here?" Sarah's voice caught. The elderly woman looked frailer than ever, but her eyes blazed with determination. "You think I'd let my favorite nurse go into surgery without saying goodbye?" Margaret reached for Sarah's hand. Her grip was weak but fierce. "Listen to me, Sarah. I've been where you are now, facing something terrifying, not knowing if you'll make it through, but you're a fighter. You've taught me that every day we have is a gift, even when it's wrapped in pain." "I'm so afraid," Sarah whispered. "Fear means you're alive. It means you have something worth fighting for." Margaret squeezed her hand. "You gave me dignity when I had nothing left. You made me laugh when I thought I'd forgotten how. Now you fight for yourself the way you fought for all of us." They sat in silence for a moment, two women who'd journeyed together through the landscape of illness, now on opposite sides of the healthcare divide. "I'll be here when you wake up," Margaret promised. "Count on it." At 6:45, the surgical team arrived. Dr. Martinez, Dr. Harrison, the anesthesiologist, a parade of masked faces that would soon be hovering over Sarah's unconscious body. Michael and Emma were allowed in for final goodbyes. Emma clung to her mother, sobbing, "I love you so much, Mom. Please come back to me." "I will, baby. I promise." Another lie told with desperate conviction. Michael kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, gentle touches that said everything words couldn't. "I'll be right here, waiting, however long it takes." The gurney began moving, wheels squeaking on polished floors. Sarah watched the ceiling tiles pass overhead, the same tiles she'd seen thousands of times, from the other side, walking beside patients being wheeled to their own uncertain fates. Now she understood what they'd felt. The vulnerability, the terror, the surrender. The operating room blazed with light. Machines beeped and hummed. Surgical instruments lay arranged on sterile trays, scalpels, retractors, sutures that would soon be cutting into her face. Dr. Martinez appeared above her, eyes kind above the surgical mask. "We're going to take good care of you, Sarah." The anesthesiologist began pushing medication through her IV, count backward from 10. 10, 9, 8. Sarah's last conscious thought was of Michael's face, Emma's tears, Margaret's fierce determination. Then darkness. She woke in increments, first to pain, sharp and overwhelming, then to voices, muffled and distant. Finally to awareness of her own body, heavy and wrong. Her face was wrapped in bandages. She couldn't feel her nose, couldn't feel anything but throbbing agony where her nose should be. Someone was holding her hand. Michael's voice came through the fog. "You're okay. You made it. You're okay." But she wasn't okay. She could tell by the heaviness of the bandages, by the way people's voices caught when they looked at her, by the terrible absence where her face used to be. A nurse, not Jennifer. Someone Sarah didn't know adjusted her pain medication. The room swam and tilted. "The surgery took 6 hours," Michael said. "They removed. They had to take more tissue than expected, but they got all the infection?" Sarah tried to speak, but her mouth wouldn't form words properly. Everything felt distorted, alien, wrong. After Martinez appeared at some point, Sarah had lost track of time. The surgery was successful in terms of removing infected tissue. We excised 42% of your nasal cartilage and surrounding soft tissue. Reconstruction will be extensive, but we'll address that later. Right now, we focus on healing and preventing reinfection. 42%, nearly half her nose. Sarah closed her eyes against tears that wouldn't stop. 3 days after surgery, Sarah still hadn't looked at her face. Nurses changed her bandages while she kept her eyes squeezed shut, refusing the mirror they offered. She knew what she'd see: disfigurement, destruction, the price of her denial. Michael slept in a reclining chair beside her bed every night. Emma visited after school, sitting quietly, sometimes doing homework, sometimes just holding her mother's hand. Neither pushed Sarah to look, to speak beyond minimal responses, to engage with the reality she'd woken into. The antibiotics flowed continuously through her eye, poisoning the bacteria while making Sarah nauseous and exhausted. Every 4 hours, nurses drew blood to monitor her kidney and liver function. Walsh visited twice daily, reviewing lab results with an expression Sarah had learned to read, cautiously optimistic but vigilant. "The infection markers are dropping," St. Walsh reported on the 4th day. "Your body is responding to the antibiotics. That's excellent news." Sarah nodded without feeling relief. The infection might be retreating, but her face was gone. On the 5th day, CDC officials arrived 2 serious-faced epidemiologists in protective equipment who questioned Sarah extensively about her work history, patient contacts, and equipment she'd handled. Their presence triggered anxiety throughout the hospital staff. "We're tracing potential exposure vectors," one explained. "Your case represents an unusual antibiotic-resistant strain we need to monitor carefully." The questioning lasted hours. Sarah's head pounded, and the pain medication made her thoughts fuzzy, but she answered as thoroughly as possible. What equipment had she used most frequently? Which patients had she cared for? Had she noticed anyone else with similar symptoms? That evening, Jennifer finally gained permission to visit outside normal visiting hours. She came bearing contraband real coffee from their favorite cafe, not the hospital cafeteria's weak brew. "You look terrible," Jennifer said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Thanks." Sarah managed a weak smile. "The whole floor is asking about you. Margaret refuses to let anyone be pessimistic. She's appointed herself your official cheerleader." "How is she?" "Declining, honestly, but fighting, like someone taught her how." Jennifer's voice caught. "Sarah, the CDC shut down the oncology floor for 2 days. They found 3 other patients with the same bacterial strain, minor infections. Nothing like yours, but still concerning." Sarah's stomach dropped. "I infected them." "No," Jennifer said firmly. "You were all infected by contaminated equipment. The CDC traced it to an automated blood pressure cuff that wasn't being properly sterilized between patients. This isn't your fault." But guilt settled heavy in Sarah's chest anyway. She'd been the first to show symptoms, the canary in the coal mine. While she'd ignored her growing mass, that bacteria had been spreading through equipment to other vulnerable patients. "Sarah, listen to me." Jennifer gripped her hand. "Because you got sick, because it was so severe, the CDC investigated. They found the source. They're implementing new sterilization protocols across the entire hospital system. You may have saved hundreds of future patients from similar infections." The words didn't penetrate the fog of self-blame. On the seventh day, Dr. Martinez insisted Sarah look at her face. "You need to start processing this visually. Avoidance will only make it harder." Sarah shook her head, turning away. "I'll be here with you," Michael said softly. "Whatever you see, we'll face it together." Finally, reluctantly, Sarah nodded. Dr. Martinez removed the bandages methodically, each layer revealing more damaged tissue. The air felt strange on her exposed face, cold, vulnerable. Dr. Martinez held up a hand mirror. Sarah looked at a stranger. The left side of her nose was collapsed. A concave crater where cartilage had been removed. Surgical incisions formed angry red lines across the bridge. Her nostrils were asymmetrical, one significantly smaller than the other. Swelling distorted her entire mid-face, and bruising that painted her skin in shades of purple and yellow. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't reconcile the ruined face in the mirror with her mental image of herself. Michael wrapped his arms around her while she sobbed. "You're alive," he whispered. "That's all that matters. You're alive." But was this living, looking like a monster? Knowing she'd carry this disfigurement forever, facing a year of painful reconstructive surgeries that would never fully restore what she'd lost that afternoon, Margaret made her daily pilgrimage to Sarah's room. The elderly woman moved more slowly now, each step an effort, but her determination never wavered. "They told me you finally looked," Margaret said. Settling into the visitor's chair, Sarah couldn't meet her eyes. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" Margaret continued. "I see a survivor. I see someone who fought a battle most people can't imagine and came out the other side." "I see a ruined face," Sarah whispered. "Faces change, bodies fail. That's not tragedy, that's being human." Margaret leaned forward. 40 years ago, I was burned saving a patient from a fire. 3rd-degree burns on my arms and neck. I thought my life was over, that no one would look at me the same way. She rolled up her sleeves, revealing silvered scar tissue that Sarah had noticed but never asked about. These scars became part of my story. They reminded me every day that I'd chosen to run into danger instead of away from it. They made me braver, not weaker. "I'm a nurse," Sarah said. "How can I care for patients looking like this? They'll be horrified. They'll see someone who understands suffering, someone who's been where they are. Your compassion was always your greatest strength, Sarah. This doesn't change, that it deepens it." Yet Margaret stayed for an hour, telling stories about her decades of nursing, the patients she'd loved, the losses she'd grieved, the meaning she'd found in service despite her own pain. When she left, Sarah sat in silence watching the rain streak her window. Michael dozed in his chair. Emma had texted that she'd visit after debate team practice. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. DeWalsh entered, carrying a thick folder. "I wanted to update you on the CDC's findings," she said. "They've traced the bacterial contamination to a specific blood pressure monitor that was used throughout the oncology floor. The sterilization protocol was inadequate for this particular equipment model." She opened the folder, showing Sarah charts and bacterial culture reports. "Because of your case, the hospital has completely overhauled equipment sterilization procedures. They're implementing this across their entire network, 15 hospitals. The CDC is recommending these protocols nationally." DeWalsh met Sarah's eyes directly. I know this feels like cold comfort right now, but your suffering has revealed a critical safety gap. You've potentially prevented thousands of future infections. Sarah absorbed this slowly. Her pain, her disfigurement, her months of recovery ahead, all of it had exposed a dangerous flaw in healthcare systems. I still wish it hadn't happened to me, she said quietly. Of course, but it did happen, and what you do with that experience will define how this story ends. After Dr. Walsh left, Sarah sat with those words. She thought about Margaret's scars, worn like badges of courage. She thought about the patients whose infections would be prevented because hers had been so catastrophic. She thought about the meaning that could be forged from suffering. She was still terrified, still grieving her lost face, still facing months of painful recovery. But for the first time since waking from surgery, Sarah felt something beyond despair, a tiny spark of purpose beginning to kindle in the darkness. Sarah was discharged after 5 weeks of intensive antibiotic treatment. The bacterial cultures finally showed complete eradication. No trace of the resistant strain remained in her system. Dr. Walsh called it a medical victory, though it felt more like surviving a war that had left her permanently scarred. Home felt strange after so long in the hospital. The familiar rooms seemed different, as if she were seeing them through a stranger's eyes. Emma had filled the house with flowers, and Michael had stocked the refrigerator with soft foods Sarah could eat without difficulty. She still took oral antibiotics, a 4-week course, to ensure the infection didn't return. Pills that made her nauseated but were nothing compared to the IV medications that had ravaged her system. Her kidney function was slowly recovering. Her energy remained depleted. Simple tasks exhausting. The mirror in the bathroom became both enemy and teacher. Each morning, Sarah forced herself to look, not turning away, not hiding, but witnessing what she'd become. The swelling had decreased, revealing the true extent of the surgical reconstruction. Her nose sat crooked on her face. The left side collapsed, a visible depression where cartilage should be. Strangers stared when Michael took her for short walks around the neighborhood. Children pointed until their parents hushed them. Sarah wore sunglasses even on cloudy days, trying to draw attention away from her ruined nose. But gradually, incrementally, she learned to meet those stares, to see curiosity instead of revulsion, to understand that her appearance shocked people not because she was monstrous, but because her face told a story of survival they couldn't immediately understand. 3 months after surgery, De Martinez scheduled the first reconstructive procedure, harvesting cartilage from Sarah's rib to rebuild the nasal framework. Another surgery, another recovery. But this time, Sarah approached it differently, not with terror, but with grim determination. "This is just the beginning," De Martinez explained, showing Sarah computer projections of the multi-stage reconstruction. "We'll need at least 3 more surgeries over the next year. Your nose will never look exactly as it did, but will restore function and improve appearance significantly." Sarah studied the projections, a face that would be hers, but different, marked by what she'd endured. "I can live with different," she said. "Different means I'm still here." The second surgery went smoothly. Recovery was painful, but manageable. Her body already accustomed to healing. Michael took another week off work. Emma had started her senior year, juggling college applications and caring for her mother with remarkable maturity. One evening, Emma sat in Sarah's bed, both of them looking through photo albums from before the infection. "Do you miss how you looked?" Emma asked quietly. Sarah touched her healing face, feeling the bandages protecting the surgical site. "Sometimes, but mostly, I just feel grateful to be alive, to look at these photos with you." 4 months after her initial surgery, Providence Seattle Medical Center offered Sarah a new position, infection control coordinator, for their entire hospital network. She wouldn't return to bedside nursing, but would instead develop and oversee sterilization protocols, train staff, and ensure no other patient suffered what she had. "We need your experience," the hospital administrator said. "You understand both the clinical and personal dimensions of healthcare-associated infections. You can make a real difference." Sarah accepted. The work would be challenging, administrative rather than hands-on, but it felt right, transforming her suffering into systemic change. Her first day back, staff gathered to welcome her. Jennifer hugged her tight. Rebecca Stone wiped away tears. Even physicians Sarah barely knew stopped to shake her hand, thank her, acknowledge what she'd endured. Sarah stood before the oncology nursing staff for an afternoon training session, her scarred face visible to all. She'd stopped wearing excessive makeup, stopped trying to hide. Her appearance was part of her message now. "I was infected by equipment we all trusted," she began. "I ignored symptoms because I was busy caring for others. By the time I sought help, the infection was life-threatening. I want to tell you my story not to frighten you, but to ensure it never happens again." She clicked through slides showing her progression, the initial small bump, the growing mass, the ulceration, the post-surgical damage. People gasped. Some looked away, but everyone listened. Every piece of equipment matters. Every sterilization protocol exists for a reason. One contaminated blood pressure cuff infected multiple patients because we assumed our systems were adequate. They weren't. She demonstrated new sterilization procedures, explained the updated protocols, answered questions with the authority of someone who'd paid the ultimate price for systemic failure. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, not polite, perfunctory clapping, but sustained, emotional recognition of her courage. Afterward, Jennifer pulled her aside. "Margaret would have been so proud." "You found your purpose in this." Sarah's throat tightened. Margaret had passed away 6 weeks earlier, her cancer finally claiming victory. Sarah had been at her bedside, holding her hand, whispering gratitude for the lessons learned. "She told me before she died that suffering only breaks us if we let it," Sarah said. "She chose to let it make her wiser, braver, more compassionate. I'm trying to do the same." Winter settled over Seattle, bringing rain and early darkness. Sarah's face continued healing, the third reconstructive surgery scheduled for spring. She worked 40 hours a week now, traveling between hospitals in the Providence network, transforming infection control from abstract policy to lived reality. One rainy afternoon, she visited Providence, Seattle, and stopped by the oncology floor. A young nurse named Christine was caring for an elderly patient with advanced cancer. Sarah watched her work, the gentle touch, the attentive listening, the small kindnesses that made unbearable situations slightly more bearable. "You remind me of someone I knew," Sarah said. "A nurse named Margaret, who taught me that compassion is the most important medicine we offer." Christine smiled. "Someone told me about her, about you too. They said you're the nurse who survived the superbug." Sarah touched her face reflexively. "I survived because I finally stopped ignoring reality, because I let people help me, Because I found meaning in the suffering. She left the hospital as evening fell, rain washing the streets clean. At home, Michael was cooking dinner while Emma worked on college essays at the kitchen table. The ordinary domestic scene felt precious, something she'd nearly lost, nearly taken for granted. Emma looked up when Sarah entered. How was work? Good, hard, important. Sarah hung her wet coat and joined her family. Michael served pasta. Emma shared a funny story from school, and they ate together like thousands of families across the city. Normal life, extraordinary in its ordinariness. That night, Sarah stood before the bathroom mirror one more time. Her face looked back asymmetrical, scarred, forever changed, but also alive, healing, marked by survival. She traced the surgical lines with her fingertips, feeling the ridges of scar tissue, the depression where cartilage would eventually be rebuilt. "Hello," she whispered to her reflection. "We made it." And for the first time in months, Sarah smiled at the stranger in the mirror, who was somehow, impossibly, still herself. Sarah's story reminds us that life's deepest wounds can become our greatest teachers. She nearly lost everything by ignoring what her body was telling her, by prioritizing everyone else's needs above her own health, by believing she was too busy or too knowledgeable to need help. How many of us have done the same, dismissed symptoms, postponed appointments, convinced ourselves we're too strong to be vulnerable? But here's the truth that carried Sarah through her darkest days. We are never truly alone when we allow others to love us through our brokenness. Her husband, Michael, never wavered. Her daughter, Emma, grew stronger. Her friend, Margaret, showed her that scars are simply evidence of battles we've survived. The medical team that rebuilt her face also rebuilt her purpose. Sarah transformed her suffering into a mission that now protects thousands of patients from similar infections. Your face, your body, your story, they may change through illness, accident, or time. But the essence of who you are, the love you give and receive, the meaning you create from your experiences, these remain unshakable. Sarah looks different now, but she sees more clearly than ever what truly matters. What experience in your life taught you to value what's truly important? Have you ever found unexpected strength during your darkest moment? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.